The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to stand up in this House to deliver my first complete speech following the recent election campaign. And like the other members in this House, I would like to take one moment to thank the voters of Lac-Saint-Louis for showing their confidence in me once again by re-electing me to represent them in the House of Commons for a fourth time since 2004. I believe it is a privilege and a responsibility that all members of this House understand deeply, for having been through this common experience of being chosen by one's fellow citizens, by one's friends and neighbors, by one's constituents to represent them in the House. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to come to the topic at hand, which is the 2011 budget redux. On June 6th, June 6th was an important date in tax history in Canada, because it was Tax Freedom Day, and every year now Tax Freedom Day occurs on a later date, and that is because of bracket creep. As incomes go up, people move into higher brackets and are paying more and more tax. And this brings me to a related point, which is the fact that individual taxpayers are carrying more and more the tax burden in this country, and corporations are carrying less and less of the tax burden. And in fact, I'd like to draw the attention of the House to an article that appeared in Le Devoir back in March. C'est un article signé Hélène Buzetti, dont la manchette lit comme suit: en réduisant l'impôt des entreprises, le gouvernement fédéral a dû aller chercher plus de 50% de ses revenus dans les poches des particuliers en 2010. And the article goes on to say that individuals are paying 50% of government revenues. Now, some will say that's because corporations are paying a smaller percentage because of the recession, which has reduced corporate profits and therefore corporate taxes. Yet, if one looks at the projections for 2012, 2013, which the government sees as a sort of a return to better economic times, even then, individual taxpayers like you and me, Mr. Speaker, will be paying collectively 49% of the tax revenues of this country. So in some way, one can say that by allowing the corporate tax rate, the federal corporate tax rate, to continue dropping, what the federal government is doing really is giving us a tax and budget that increases the tax burden, Mr. Speaker. Now, what I find interesting in the government's arguments is that it likes to have it both ways. It likes to tell us that when things don't go well, it's the fault of the international economy. It's the fact that demand south of the border is not as strong as it should be, and therefore we suffer the consequences in terms of employment and lower corporate profits. But then, on the other hand, it wants to take credit for everything good that happens. So it says, well, if we cut corporate taxes, we'll have greater employment. But you see, there's a contradiction there, Mr. Speaker. The fact that employment is not growing as fast as it could is because of the recession south of the border, because we are an exporting nation. Cutting the corporate tax rate will not spur companies to invest, because investment, anyone who's taken an Economics 101 course knows that investment responds to heightened confidence, and heightened confidence is a result of heightened demand. So as long as markets in the United States remain soft, there will not be an incentive for the corporate sector in Canada to invest. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, we've seen evidence of that, because corporations collectively have been sitting on about $400 billion of cash. That means that they have all the money they need to invest, but they're not investing because the economic climate in the United States is not encouraging them to invest, Mr. Speaker. So it's not a question that there isn't enough money to invest. And even if a company didn't have large cash reserves, it could borrow at historically low interest rates. And the reason that companies aren't doing that as much as they should is because of the demand situation in the United States. Now, another point I'd like to raise in regards to corporate tax cuts is that, and this is something that hasn't really been discussed because it is a bit technical, but when you reduce the corporate tax rate in Canada, you also reduce the dividend tax credit that individual taxpayers apply on their taxes on the dividend income they receive. That's because there's a relationship between the corporate tax rate and the dividend tax credit. So you reduce corporate tax rates, you reduce the dividend tax credit, Mr. Speaker. In fact, you're therefore increasing taxes on Canadians. The other issue that's quite important to keep in mind is that in the United States, when a company pays tax in Canada, a multinational corporation pays tax in Canada, it gets a credit on its U.S. corporate income tax. If it pays less tax, corporate tax in Canada, that credit will not be as great. So it will make up for the lower taxes, corporate income tax it pays in Canada, with higher corporate income tax being paid to the U.S. Treasury. So that dampens any positive effect that reducing corporate income taxes could have, Mr. Speaker. Another interesting point that came out of an article in The Economist of I think it was April, is that when taxes on a company's profits go down, most of it is paid out in the form of dividends to shareholders. So, for example, there was a study done by Kristen Forbes, a former member of George W. Bush's Council of Economic Advisors, and that study found that for every extra dollar of foreign profits American firms brought home, because, say, of lower taxes perhaps abroad or for whatever reason, American firms tended not to invest so much as to pay out from 60 to 92 cents to shareholders. So to say that, if we reduce corporate taxes, all of a sudden there's going to be an investment boom, is really not a proper conclusion to draw, Mr. Speaker. The other issue, for example, is that our corporate tax rates are much lower than those of our competitors. So there's no reason to drop them more at this time. It will not have any impact on corporate behavior. And in fact, if one looks at Dell Computer moved out of a low corporate tax rate into a higher corporate tax rate country. It went from Ireland to Poland, where the corporate taxes were higher. So that negates the argument that the government makes about attracting investment. And why did it go to Poland, Mr. Speaker? It went to Poland because it was searching for lower wage rates. So what really attracts companies is not so much lower tax rates, but lower wage rates. Now, I think, Mr. Speaker, you'll agree that the mission we've given ourselves as a country is not to become the lowest wage country in the hemisphere. That's not where we're headed. What we're trying to do is to produce the most innovative products and services that we can using our brain power. In other words, we want to encourage economic growth through innovation. And how do you do that, Mr. Speaker? Well, you invest in education. You make sure that all of the best minds in Canada who want to go to university can have a chance to go to university. And that's what we were trying to do in our Liberal platform in the last election, with our philosophy that if you get the grades, Mr. Speaker, you get to go. And that's why we were offering students $1,000 a year. $1,000 a year for every year of CEGEP and university that they were to complete. And that would have been very valuable for students and for their families, for the middle-class families that the party opposite claims to have a monopoly on representing. Those families are facing higher and higher tuition fees. In Quebec, tuition fees will be going up $400 to $500 a year for the next few years. Those families need some relief. They need some relief, and we were ready to give them relief through that $1,000 a year that we were going to give their sons and daughters to help pay for their tuition. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what we need to do. We need to innovate, and we need to encourage innovation, and we encourage innovation by opening our universities to the broadest pool of minds possible. There's another way to encourage innovation, Mr. Speaker, as you know, and that is to invest directly in research and development facilities. And in fact, we haven't we haven't encouraged basic research to the extent that we should if we want to be a leading nation in the international economy going into the moving on into the 21st century. Did you know, Mr. Speaker, that the last Nobel Prize Canada received for medicine was in 1923, and it went to Banting and MacLeod, I believe it was, for the discovery of Banting and Best for the discovery of insulin. That means there's something wrong, Mr. Speaker. We're not innovating the way we should, and I would like to propose that we invest in Canada in something called the Canadian Molecular Biology Laboratory, which has been a concept that is being advocated by a McGill scholar and friend of mine, Dr. Jean Bergeron, who has seen the model work in Europe, which has a European molecular biology laboratory and attracts the best minds from across the world to work in these laboratories on molecular biology science, which, as you know, Mr. Speaker, produces dividends in terms of drug discovery later on, and that is particularly important to my constituency, which houses a number of brand-name pharmaceutical companies which could benefit from some spin-offs in the area of basic research in molecular biology. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't know how much time I have left. I'm pretty much done, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Very well done.